Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. On this edition of our podcast, we have Philip Giraldi and we have George Szamuely, and we're going to discuss Phil's article in the American Herald Tribune, dated September 22nd of this year. It's a brilliant piece, it's very worthwhile reading it. A piece like no other, much to do about nothing, but Act Two is coming up. Fill us in. What's the background to this, Phil? Why did you write it? Go ahead.
Well, it was, the media has been inundated with their own analysis of what this so-called peace agreement, or however you want to phrase it, what it means and what it's all about. And I felt that they were missing the boat pretty much on the true significance of it. I think that there are a whole bunch of people or a bunch of interests that are served by this agreement. But at the same time, there are certain traps that come with it. And the most significant trap, I think, is the fact that the United States, for whatever intention to eventually withdraw from the Middle East, has basically locked itself into a framework where it will be there forever.
So, Phil, do you see this agreement as mainly a sop for Israel and Israel's champions in the U.S., or is this more about forging an anti-Iran alliance with a view to an anti-Iran war in the next term? Which is the more important factor here?
Well, I think both those purposes are served by this. And I would point out that the question of a war against Iran, that's a question of when someone decides to pull the trigger on this. And but clearly this is a framework now for a broader anti-Iranian alliance in the region. And if that's a way one seeks to bring peace to the region, well, that's probably a big mistake. So I think that's a large part of it. And of course, there are other winners too. I mean, I think that it's unmistakable that, of course, this is a Donald Trump victory lap, even though the consequences of it are not going to be very good, and the actual gain for the United States is invisible. In fact, there is no gain for the United States. The United States is locked into an arrangement. The United States will be arming everyone who is involved in this, but Donald Trump, for the next 6 weeks, will be able to claim that he's the peacemaker. And that will bring in some votes. It will bring in some money. And that's a short-term strategy, which I'm sure they're thinking of. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is able to say, look, we have good relations with 2 more Arab states. That means that I've brought Israel out from the darkness. We're no longer a pariah state. People are seeking to tie themselves to us diplomatically and commercially. So it's he wins too, and the 2 Arab states, they also win because the United States will be selling them weapons, giving them political cover, the usual things.
Yeah, but the interesting here, if I could quote the first line, which I thought was really brilliant of your article, it is odd that the White House is gloating over its claimed peace agreement in the Middle East at the same time when one of its signatories is bombing Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza, which is absolutely. So what does this have to do with peace here? No, I think your analysis is brilliant because if you look at it dispassionately, the greater Middle East is a strategic backwater for the United States, and this is a way to tie them in through arms sales. Though it's really interesting here when you have the signatories, for example, Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Israel, its new friend, its new international ally, is petitioning the United States not to sell certain weaponry to the United Arab Emirates. I mean, it's a kind of a one-sided agreement here. And on top of that, which I think is very important when you bring up in your article, there is a nuance changed in the Trump administration when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and that nuance is that the Palestinians simply don't exist. You just wish them away. They don't exist, so you don't have to deal with them. That is a very, very serious error on the powers that on the part of the powers that be. Phil.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Trump took steps early in his administration to make the Palestinians go away. And as it turned out, it was based on a fraudulent video that Benjamin Netanyahu had shown the president to convince him that the Palestinians were baby killers. And so this kind of thing plays out all the time. And Trump knows, where the power is. The power is with Israel and its friends. It's not with the Arab states. And as you note, the United States has no compelling interest any longer to stay in the Middle East, apart from doing what it can in a multinational sense to make sure that oil keeps flowing, that there's relative peace in the region for commercial reasons. So we have no strategic interest there. We have no threat coming from the Middle East. Iran does not threaten the United States, and it's really that simple. So and Trump indeed 2 weeks ago admitted that we are in the Middle East, or he is in the Middle East, to protect Israel.
Yeah. What's interesting here is back in 2016, Trump was actually seemed to sound quite even-handed between Israel and the Palestinians. He talked about this historic deal that he would forge between Israel and Palestine. He said he would succeed when no one else has. And this transformation, remember at the time, the Israel lobby was very, very wary of Trump. They were very nervous about what Trump's intentions were. So it's extraordinary that once he's in power, he has gone further than any previous administration in downgrading the Palestinians, as you say, kind of almost obliterating them from existence. And his latest statements of saying, well, they're so nasty about us, so we're not going to do anything for them until they say something nice about us. He treats them with utter disdain. What explains this transformation? Is it Jared Kushner? What happened?
Well, I think Kushner is to a certain extent a lightweight who's a kind of a bit player in all this. The real player is, of course, Sheldon Adelson, who in the last election, 2018, coughed up $100 million for Republican candidates and for the Republican Party. And apparently he's preparing to do more or less the same on this cycle. So you're talking about a huge amount of money in terms of political contributions. I think it's as simple as that. Money talks. The money will be used to promote the Trump vision of the issues that he thinks the Democrats are vulnerable on. Most notably, I think, the security issue, the crime and punishment issue. And I think he's correct in that. I think pumping enough money into the system, pushing that agenda, will make him a very viable candidate in 6 weeks.
Phil, one of the things I find, thinking counterintuitively from the foreign policy blob, if you look at Bahrain and you look at the United Arab Emirates, and in light of what in George's first question about an anti-Iran alliance that could be activated. I mean, given the crazies that we've seen for the last 30, 40 years inside the Beltway when it comes to Iran, it's just a psychosis here. But in light of Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, I mean, if things really get hot, well, they'll disappear in a matter of minutes. I mean, I find it really inexplicable that you want to be the front line in all of this. Great, and Israel will make sure they got your back, guys. I mean, after everything that's been said and done in that region since the Second World War, but particularly since the 1967, I mean, what kind of strategic logic is being played out here? I mean, Iran is not going to discriminate. It will employ a multifaceted military reaction if it's attacked. Okay, and these little countries are very, very close and very, very vulnerable. Oh, and by the way, we remember the Aramco energy installation in Saudi Arabia. It was completely indefensible from all of the billions and billions of dollars of trinkets that they've bought from the U.S. What's their strategic thinking, Phil?
I think you could probably say there is no strategic thinking.
Okay.
I think the underlying thought process, if there is one, is that they will be protected by the United States. Bahrain, for example, hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet, and it also hosts a major Navy communications center. I think the idea here is that we involve the United States in this security arrangement to such an extent that the United States becomes our protector. I don't think that's a very good idea because, as you say, the vulnerability of these places to Iran, which is, a couple hundred miles away, versus the United States, which is 7,000 miles away, would indicate to me that this is a bad way of thinking.
That's right, because Iran, that's a serious country. It's a big country. It has a large, educated workforce. It has a scientific, industrial base. It's an ancient civilization, unlike these essentially tribal kingdoms. I mean, it's a joke. The idea that these Gulf states can forge an anti-Iran alliance is laughable. I mean, Saudi Arabia can't fight its way out of a paper bag. So it's hard to know what any of these people are thinking. I mean, these people can't possibly take on Iran.
Well, and interestingly, of course, Bahrain, the majority of the population is Shia.
Yeah.
And there's a great deal of sympathy for Iran there. So they would be probably confronted with something like a civil war or an insurrection if they were to engage in any actual combat with Iran.
Phil, in your art, in the second part of the title of your article, but Act 2 is coming up, and you mentioned the possibility of an October surprise. Explain what that means.
Yeah, October surprises goes back to the Reagan administration when there was the release of the hostages by the Iranians was seen as an arrangement to help Reagan get elected. And indeed it was. The CIA station in Paris colluded with the station in Rome, and they did make the arrangement. So that's the October surprise. But in this case, we're thinking that it's more likely that someone will be tempted to pull the trigger. And that would most likely be from the United States. And that the United States and Donald Trump, if as the election is drawing closer, believes that something drastic has to happen and a little war against a well-known enemy might be just a ticket. So that's kind of a suspicion at the back of the minds of many of us.
It's very interesting, though, is that such things are not likely to be successful. You might think, oh, everyone's going to rally around the flag and it's going to work for Trump. It might well work against Trump because it's Trump who has escalated this unnecessary conflict with Iran, and now America's got a real problem on its hands. So it won't work in Trump's favor, I don't think.
Well, except there's a perception problem. See, what you're saying is absolutely true, but the fact is the media doesn't report it that way.
Yeah.
And it depends whether their hatred of Trump is greater than their hatred of Iran in terms of how they're going to play it if this happens. And I don't trust anything anymore in the United States. I mean, any news story in the New York Times, Washington Post, forget it. It's an editorial. Every news piece is an editorial. And everything coming out of the government is half true, maybe less than half true, and with a lot of lies built in. And it's become really the curse on the United States in terms of informing the public, because the public is not informed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there was that story circulated that Iran may be plotting to assassinate some ambassador in South Africa, and of course we have everyone's favorite one, the bounty hunters in Afghanistan. People will swallow anything. One thing in reaction to George's last question there to both of you, and we'll end it, is that, well, if there's going to be an October surprise, I guess Trump will have to kiss his Nobel Peace Prize away. Okay. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you very much, George, for being here on the Gaggle. If you like this, please like, share, and subscribe, and you'll be seeing a whole lot more ahead.